Hi dear friends, in this video we will we will discuss about the shift in importance from writer to reader, tracing the valid roots of reader response theory. Dear friends, all of you know that the importance of the reader response theory or criticism on literary criticism over the five past 35 years has been profound and wide-ranging. It has transformed the academic study of literary text and fundamentally altering the canon of what is taught and setting a new agenda for analysis, as well as radically influencing the parallel process of publishing, reviewing, and literary research. A host of related disciplines have been affected by the reader response theory and reception theory, including the linguistics, philosophy, history, religion, religious studies, sociology, anthropology, film, media, cultural studies, geography, economics, and law. It emerged in 1970s as an influential critical theory of the post-structural tradition, firming establishing in the reader's role in interpreting or analyzing the literary text. In essence, reader response theories reject new criticism and dominates the literary theory and criticism from the late 1930s, although 1930s through the 1950s. Reader response critic claimed that the text comes alive only with the reader's active participation and interpretation with the text. The reader response critic emphasizes diverse kind of expectations, violations, deferment, satisfaction, formulation and unformulation, and restructuring of the expectation in the reading process. For reader response critic, text is not what the author makes, but it is as the reader takes it to be. It is reader who, with the help of his reading experiences, gives meaning to the text. So reader creates the text as much as the author does. Okay. So critics should concentrate on the reader and the reading process. Here in this video, I would like to point out a close relationship between the text, the reading process, as well as how the importance to a reader, author, or poet to a text, and from text itself to a reading process and the reader is shifted in the course of literary criticism. Okay, in the in the image you can see how the importance from author to text and from text to reader is changed. As far as the diagram that you have seen, it shows us right from the Aristotle to the Romantic critics, everyone stressed the importance of author and poet and writer. Objectivity in literary text has been discussed since the days of Aristotle. For he originated the literary theory that emphasizes the objective features of the text and the authorial intentions revealed by those features. His poetics analyzes the objective features of the Greek epics, dramas, and means that are more or less appropriate to the full realization of various literary intentions. While Plato condemned poetry and poets on the moral, intellectual, and emotional ground, Aristotle praised the poetic pantheon. Horace also praised the poetry and the poets and advocates poet to study the great originals of the Greece and dream of them by day and night. According to Horace, the function of poetry is to bend what is improving with what please and at once delight and instruct the readers. Perhaps you may remember Sir Philip Sidney. He defined poetry and considered it superior to philosophy. Ben Jonson followed the line of Sidney and declared poet as a maker. Okay. As John Dryden called poet as neither a teacher nor a bare imitator, but a creator who, with his life and nature as a raw material, produces a thing altogether. Even for Dr. Johnson, a poet becomes a creator, and by virtue of his inventives and imaginative powers. He considered that poetry must unite pleasure with truth. The poet must use his knowledge and illustrates moral, religious, and universal truth. So, with the dawn of Romanticisms, William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, S.T. Coleridge, jointly wrote the new epoch-making book, that is the Lyrical Ballad, in 1798, in which they expressed their views about the poet and the poetry. For William Wordsworth, poetry is a spontaneous expression of a powerful emotions recollected in tranquility. And poetry is the breath of a finer spirit of all knowledge, or the impassioned expressions, which is the countenance of all science. William Wordsworth, of course, writing about the writing of poetry, not about the response to the poetry, but the intention between the feeling and the reason and countenance of all and the contention that original emotions can be preserved and articulated properly in literature. William Wordsworth offered the role of moral teacher to the poet. His companion, S.T. Coleridge, added the power of wonder to the poet. Okay, so it is very interesting to note. In his essay, My First Acquaintance with Poet, William Hazlitt, he also shows himself to be an early advocate for the expression of feeling in responding to literature. He conceives of Wordsworth's poem as embodying both a new style and refreshing feelings like those we experience when we encountered the fresh soils or the first welcome breath of the springs. So this is what about in the early age we find that there is an importance is given to the writer or the poet. But later on, when we come to the next stage, that is the Victorian age, we find that the Victorian age marked a new phase in the history of literary criticism. It offered us two lines of thoughts. First is art for art's sake, and second is art for very good life's sake. It is interesting to note that both movements stressed the importance of text. It is very interesting. So, in this age, we can see a remarkable shift in importance from author to text. Okay, while Walter Peter and Oscar Wilde stressed the importance of text and advocated the art for art's sake, Thomas Carlyle, Ruskin also stressed the importance of text, and they radically argued for the art for life's sake. It was the mature Arnold who sought a compromise and declared poetry as the criticism of life under the condition fixed for such criticism by the laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty. He opines that our race will get consolation and stay in such criticism. It is certain that all critics during the Victorian age know the importance of text and they argued for it. Taking the clues from Arnold T.S. Eliot, he may be called the Napoleon of the modern English criticism and a staunch classicist. He stressed the importance of text. He argued that poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but it is not the expression of personality, but an escape from personality. So, poetry is the extinction of personality, and hence the honest criticism should be directed towards poetry and not against the poet. So, here we can find the importance is how the importance is shifted from author or the poet to the text, that is the poetry. By advocating his theory of impersonality of poetry, T.S. Eliot revolted against the romantic notion of poetry and poet and brought a scientific base or fundament to poetry and criticism. It was I.A. Richards who yoked criticism and psychology and attempted to lay down an explicit theoretical base for the literary criticism in his Principle of Literary Criticism in 1924. In his work, Two Uses of Language, he explained how the emotive language of poetry is different from the referential language of the non-literary discourse. In his practical criticism, all of we know that he attempted to establish a basic tenet for the close reading of the text. During this period, one finds the importance of literary process and criticism is totally shifted from author or poet or writer to the literary text itself. Taking the clues from T.S. Eliot and I. Richards, a new branch of criticism was flourished in England and America. It is called as the New Criticism, that we all know that in one of the lecture delivered by the Elias Spingarn in 1920, literary new criticism is used to refer the theory and practice that was prominent in the American literary criticism until the 1960s. So again, in the new criticism, we find that the emphasis on the text is more clear and vivid and is perceptible in every new critics. Each new critic has a profound and reverential regard for the text, which manifests itself as in their obsessive concern for the word on the pages. In the see, we can here discuss so many things and so many criticism. The merit of the text is to be found in the language of the text. In Criticism Inc., an essay appeared in the review, Virginia Quarterly Review, in 1937. John Crow Ransom declared that the criticism is the occupation of the university professor. He Here he gave a definite trademark to criticism, and he pondered over the would-be critic or who can be criticized more genuinely and dispassionately. So again, here we can find how the shift from the text to the shift to the critic or the reader is how the shift is transforming from one to another. So later on in the say in their criticism, and university professors who remains free from all fallacies that we know, and the professors can dispassionately and clearly and perfectly judge and appreciate the literature. That is what the Ransom asserts in his criticism inc or criticism inc or the criticism limited. That is the he believed that the criticism inc or incorporation or the criticism limited is the business of the professionals, professors of the literature in particularly. So that is what even in his essay The Language of Paradox, Klinbrook, he clearly declared that the paradox is the language appropriate and inevitable to the poetry. Here we have the so many, even the structuralists like Ferdinand de Saussure, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Janet Robb, everybody emphasized for the structure of the language in the text. So it is interesting to note that parallel to structuralism, deconstruction or the post-structuralism was developed, while the structuralist emphasize the structure in the text. Deconstructionists aim to show that how the text is deconstructed itself. Now, it is very important and very interesting to point out. Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher, proved that no sign is completely meaningful, and because each sign depends on another sign for meaning, each sign needs other sign as trace supplements. Therefore, he replaced the Saussurean word difference with the French word difference, which means both the difference and the deferment or the postponement. He argued that each sign has to perform the two functions differing, and language is structured as an endless deferral of meaning, and therefore any search for final meaning must be metaphysical. For Derrida, writing is only an interplay of difference and deferment without any center. Without any fixed centers, word carry with them certain absence, indeterminacy, approach, stresses, supplements, and uncertainty of meaning. He also proposed a shift from phonocentrism to logocentrism or grophocentrism. And this is the shift in importance from speech to writing. In Derrida's view, there is a deferral of meaning, a postponement, calling for an archaeological dig for meaning. So these seminal observations of the Derrida emphasize the dominant role of the reader in seeking a new meaning and and finding the different interpretation of the text. So Roland Barthes, another post-structural critic, he declared the birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author. So here we find a clues, and here we find how the shift in importance from writer to text and from text to reader, how it changes. So it would help the interpretations and understanding of the reader for there to be no connection between the author and the text. In that, Rolla bar is correct. If the focus was the individual interpretation of the reader, then absolute dissociation of the author with the text would be beneficial. In his essay, Rolla Barthes, The Death of the Author, in 1968, he argued against the traditional literary criticism practice of the incorporating the intention and the biographical context of the author in an interpretation of the text. Instead, he argued that writing and creator are unrelated. He questioned the historical issues regarding to the place of the author in the text. So he argued that when the author writes the text, his voice is no more dominant in it. How reader interprets the text is more important. So author is nothing other than the translator or the imitator, and nothing is original from him. He simply imitates the material that were already used. Rolla Barthes states that the author is merely a way through such a story is he is just merely a way, he is just merely a medium through which the story is told. He thinks that if the reader were to view the work through the author's eyes, then they would gain no benefit from the reading. Therefore, he announced the reader the modern reader, sorry, had overtuned the traditional authority of the author, and Rola Barthes was very well and well studied critic. Now, it is interesting to note that Michel Foucault also mounted the similar argument in his essay "What is an Author" in 1969. So, taking the clues from Rolla Barthes' statements and against the new criticism and the formalism, reader response theory or the criticism flourished in Europe in the post-modern era. It emerged in 1970s as an influential critical theory of the post-structuralist tradition, firmly establishing the reader's role in interpreting and analyzing the literary text. In essence, reader response theory rejects the new criticisms, the dominant literary theory and criticism from the late 1930s to 1950s. The reader response critic claimed that the text comes alive only with the reader's active participations and interpretation with the text. Reader response theory or criticism was its origin in the reception theory, then the philosophical tradition of phenomenology, which does the perceiver's roles in any perceptions, and the Geneva schools of criticism. All of you know that this is the origin. The reader response critics emphasize the diverse kinds of expectations and violations, deferments and satisfactions, and expectations in the reading process. So, reader response critics, for the reader response critics, text is not what authors makes it, but it is as the readers text it to be. So, it is the reader who, with the help of his reading experience, gives meanings to the literary text. So the reader creates the text as much as the author does. Perhaps you may have heard or you may know the Wolfgang Isol, German reader response critic. He wrote Implied Reader in 1974 and The Art of Reading. He developed the phenomenological analysis of the reading process, in which he defines literary text as the product of the writer's intentional act, which in parts controls the reader's response. So, literary text is made up of certain gaps and indeterminate elements. These gaps or indeterminate elements must be filled in by a reader with the help of his creative participations with what is given in the text before him. So text activates reader's imagination, who in turn recreates the text. So Wolfgang Isers makes a distinction between the written text and unwritten text. So written text and the unwritten text. Written text means which is printed on in the book form, and the unwritten text means which that the reader creates through his imaginations by filling the gaps in the. Then we have Wolfgang Isser also gives his important definition notion, that is the gap filling. And according to Isser, the reading process is an evolving process of anticipation, frustration, retrospections, reconstructions, expectations, and satisfaction. So Norman Holland again is another leading reader response critic who yoked the theory with the psychology in his book Dynamics of Literary Responses in 1975. So, reading a poem or a novel or seeing a play or a film is a special kind of experience, and that by using the psychology to the reader response theory, he made an innovative steps in the field of the literary criticisms. He applied the psychoanalytic concepts to describe the response of the reader. So he argued that the reader's response is a product of transactive engagement between the fantasies projected by the author in the text and the unconscious desires and defenses of the reader. So again, he point out the author's identity and the projections of the fantasies in his book. Again, we have it is interesting to note that to Holland the meaning does not lie in the words on the page, but it lies in the minds of the reader, and it is the reader who breathes the meaning into the text. Therefore, Norman Holland places reader above the author, above the writer. While Harold Bloom argued that all readings are misreading, and the only difference between them is some are strong misleading and some are weak misleading. Then we have the Stanley Fish, who argued the affective stylistics and interpretive communities. His famous works, The Surprised by Seeing the Readers in the Paradise Lost in 1967, and is there, this is the very famous essay, perhaps all of you know that, is there any text in the class, the authority of the interpretive community, so it's in 1980, sorry, in yes, in 1980. According to Stanley Fish, the reading process literary converts the printed text into the temporal flow of experience in reader who has acquired the literary form patterns. So again, an interpretive, she says that, sorry, he says that an interpretive communities consist of the members who shares the particular reading strategies, similar assumptions, and the reading techniques. Besides these critics, we have the Hans Robert Jauss and David Glitch are again the important reader response critic who stress the importance of reader. Since 1980s, a tendency to stress the cultural and political factors in the reading process is also going on. In 1978, Juliet Fetterly, she wrote a Resisting Readers, where she stressed the feminine approach in the process of the reading. Now the day some reader response critic introduce the concepts of ever-changing reader. According to deconstructions and the postmodern thinkings, nothing is constant in the world, and the change is the law of universe. So reader is also no exception to it. Therefore, the reader is also ever-changing like a text. So reader is in a state of flux. Each time the reader interprets the text, he changes his interpretations frequently. Every change in the interpretation changes the readers. So changing process is like endless deferral and the text itself. Neither the text nor the reader is constant. Therefore, no reader can ever read a given text in the same way at different times unless growth has stopped. That is why the same text appeals to and arouses different emotions and feelings to the same reader when it is read at several times. So, thus, we have seen a clear cut shift in importance from writer or author or poet to text, and from text to to a reading process and the reader. Even the concept of the reader is progressive and changing. So this is what my using my thinking about the topic. So I am very thankful to you for watching my videos, and keep watching my videos, and please share your comments here in this box. You can get my mail ID and contact number. You can easily reach to me. I'm also just type my name, Dr. Yogesh Kashikar, on Google, and you can easily contact to me. Please do comment. Thank you. Thanks a lot.